Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I have some free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Now, today's ink is by Sailor, which I thought was appropriate because I haven't done one in a while. I think it's also from their Jentle series of inks, but I think it's from their Four Seasons one. It's Doyu, and I know I'm mispronouncing that. Maybe it's Doyu. Oh god, I just offended an entire nation of people. If you speak Japanese, I really would appreciate it if you would tell me how to say this down below. I hate not knowing how to pronounce things, and I always try, but even after I know, I tend to fail. But anyways, I'd like to know how to say it, even if I end up saying it wrong. I'd like to know how to say it properly. It's very dark brown. I believe the name is supposed to mean Midsummer. I don't know why such a dark brown would mean Midsummer. Maybe I am misinformed, but it is a very dark brown ink. Yeah. Two pens I used were these. This is a JinHao X750. It's the standard nib that comes with it. My X450s tend to be fairly broad and fairly wet. My 750s tend to be fairly medium, both in flow and size. So, however, I'd say they're more like a Western medium. So, and then this is an Ohto Tasche with a fine nib. However, I'd say this is more like a Western extra fine. So I thought that would at least be a nice little bit of difference. However, the nib on this is a little springy, so if you do a downstroke with any amount of pressure, it can get a little wet flowing. So thought that'd be nice. Alright, let's check out the chromatography, because this is actually some pretty interesting chromatography. Now, here's how you're supposed to do it. Put a drop of ink and then instantly dunk it in the water, and you can definitely see that dark gray with like little lines of straight black in there. And then you get some more gray, and then you get this almost purple color. Do you see that? And then you get this sort of very distinct brown all through here, and then near black up at the top. Very interesting to look at. Kind of pretty. And then here's where I let it dry, which is not how you're supposed to do it. But hopefully you'll be able to see some differences. Now, that dot down at the bottom, instead of those little lines of black, you get straight black pretty much. A little bit of gray, less than up there, and then you get more purple, more of these purple streaks, more brown, less black up at the top, and I really hope the camera will capture this. See that? It's almost like highlighter green just along there. Weird, right? And I actually do chromatographies. I do two each. I do one for each pen. And so it happened on this one too, and here you can see more of the gold underneath that green, which is fascinating. Here the gold isn't as noticeable, but there is a little bit of it. So I thought that was seriously cool. This is a and I feel like you can tell from the chromatography, this is very saturated ink. There is a lot of ink in this ink. So wanted to see what it could hold up against. So here's water. And you can definitely see that there's a lot in there because that water was moving it around. But you can see what's at the bottom didn't want to move. And then I used 1/3 bleach solution, which really didn't do much of anything. It broke it up a little there, but I mean, look at how dark and clear that was. It didn't want to move. The ammonia pen flush kind of got it moving-ish, but not a whole lot. It was like it got the brown moving and then everything else didn't want to go. Hydrogen peroxide mostly just broke up the paper. Water really was the best thing to wash this out. So if for some reason you're having trouble with this, lots and lots of water, which is always my recommendation for how to clean out pens. Always use water. If at first you don't succeed, more water. Usually do the trick. Now, I wanted to see if I could find any comparable inks. So here's Sailor's Jentle Doyou. I'm just gonna pronounce it like that for now. As you can see, very dark brown ink. It's almost passable as just a straight black ink, maybe, unless we lay it on thin, and then it is still fairly dark brown. Now, in one of the tests, I say it reminds me of Noodler's Walnut, which is probably my favorite brown ink, one of my favorite inks. It is a very dark brown. However, Walnut has a silt in it that can sink to the bottom. So when you leave it in the pen for a while, that silt, that gray stuff at the bottom, because this is partially water resistant, that gray is the stuff that remains, And sometimes when you leave it in a pen for a while, it gets darker, it gets more silty. And so this reminds me of Noodler's after it's been left to dry for a bit. But as you can see, much lighter. Here's Noodler's Nightshade, which actually most websites list under the purple page, but mine was pretty much just brown. And it's a fairly dark brown, but it's laughable compared to Doyu. Here's Noodler's Whaleman Sepia, which I'm afraid to put in a pen. So I will not be testing this. And it's supposed to be very dark and very thick, and it's almost nothing compared to that. Private Reserve Ebony Brown, which I'm actually kind of looking forward to testing. Still very dark, but still not as dark as this Doyu. Woha Unklinga Sepia Brown, which is fascinating. I think you can see it on the camera. See how there's like golden brown through here, and then there's like red brown through here? It's got all kinds of stuff going on in it, but not quite as dark. And then Toucan Umber, which is the dark brown of the Umber series, and it's pretty light compared to this. However, I just finished testing this. Quite enjoying it. So, paper test, top down and density, Clairefontaine, 90 grams per square meter. Now, if you're familiar with my videos, you know that when there's two of something, something went wrong. And it kind of did. This was something weird was going on with this, so just to be safe, I decided to test it again. This is regular sort of notebook paper for Clairefontaine. It's 90 grams, it's very dense. However, this is a very dark ink. So, I don't know. I don't think you get echo, but I don't know. It depends on how sensitive you are. Here I laid it on really thick, and I hope that... There we go. See that shiny? It almost starts to shine. That could be just because it's so dense. I mean, look at how saturated that is. So it does take a while to dry. When there's so much stuff in this ink, sometimes it's almost hard to like filter the water through all the ink particles. You know, think about like making coffee, you know. But yeah, it's very dark brown. However, I feel like it's still noticeably brown. Well, it depends on how close people are paying attention. I mean, where you work. I mean, if people aren't used to seeing colors, especially fountain pen colors, and they don't, you know. Anyways, I'm mumbling today. Impressive bit of water resistance. Now, this was probably only on the paper for maybe 20 minutes before I did the water test. That's pretty clear, pretty there, pretty dark. And the fine is actually, I'd say, every bit as readable as that more medium one. Of course, the more ink you put down, the more there is to remain, which you can see with the dots. But yeah, really not bad. The flow was actually a bit wet, and I was surprised because generally really thick inks, they don't flow as well. But here, 6 out of 10. It is mildly wet. So if you've got an out-of-control wet pen, don't put this ink in it. It'll just get worse. But yeah, there's no bleed, no feather, no spread. I don't think there's any echo. And there is kind of a sheen, but it's more like a hazy sheen. You see? It's like kind of shiny. Yeah. So there's that. Next up is Fabriano. It's 85 grams per square meter. So density-wise, it's right between Rhodia and Clairefontaine. But it's not as steamroller smooth as Clairefontaine. But it's not ceramic coated the way Rhodia is. And it has a bit of a texture, but not that kind where you think it'll get caught between your tines as you're writing, like it'll start pulling up fibers. It doesn't do that, but I actually find that more textured papers work really well with pens that have a little bit of baby's bottom. But also, this paper tends to be able to handle inks that have even Clairefontaine and Rhodia stumble in a little bit. But here, I hope this comes through, it is definitely a brown, and you get a lot of shading despite how dark it is. You can see how saturated that stuff is. I mean, look at that. And here, you see that? You see how it gets lighter? The sheen, it's almost like a gentle, light, brown, near gold sheen. But it's hazy. It's not like the outline stuff we generally see. Now, that Japanese fine took 19 seconds to dry, which makes sense because this is such dense ink and it's very dark. That medium took 27, and generally I stop counting after 30. Are the dry times kind of long? Yeah, but honestly, I was really enjoying this ink. I was taking it just fine. I was like, yeah, no, I like it. I'll do it. To the point where I didn't just test this and then clean it out of the pen. I left it in the pens, meaning I couldn't use those pens for testing, so I could keep enjoying the ink, which I don't always do. Now, there's no bleed, no feather, no spread, I say there's no sheen, but I think there is. It's a hazy sheen. I don't think there's any echo, and if there is, it's because we got this bright light and light paper down below and dark ink. But honestly, I consider myself quite sensitive to it, and I would not pause. I really wouldn't. Like, you have to really be able to see it when it's lifted off the page for me to... Anyways, Again, impressive water test. It did dye the page a little bit. You sort of get that purpley brown. But that gray down at the center, very clear, very there. If you had to recover that, I'd say you absolutely could. Next up is Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter. This was from along the edge of a number 38 pad, which if you know the sheer size of a 38 Rhodia pad, you'll get. But I was having some trouble right along this edge, but really only just along that edge, and really not much. You get like that and that. Then we get a little bit of feathering. That'll come through. Just a little bit. It's just along that edge. Everywhere else, no, we don't get it. So figured I'd stick with this paper to do the test. Now that Japanese fine took 14 seconds. The medium only took 19. And again, you can see how saturated it is. And you still get shading. I just bonked the camera and I apologize. And again, we sort of get this hazy, light brown, dark gold sheen. But it's not the halo, noticeable kind of sheen we sometimes see. This is where I said it kind of reminded me of the silty walnut. But yeah, I mean, no bleed, no feather, no spread, barring that. Very well behaved. We don't get echo. And again, pretty nice water test. Did dye the page a little bit, but that gray at the center, very clear, very there. If you had to recover that, I'd say you absolutely could. Next up is Tomoe River paper, where we definitely get that shiny thing that's going on. It is everywhere. I wish it was easier to show you on the writing, but it is everywhere. It touches absolutely everything on here. However, because this paper is known for drawing out dry times, it really did, especially with an ink this saturated. I mean, look at how much ink there is in that smear. It's very dark, very opaque. That Japanese fine took 23 seconds. That medium JinHao, 34. That is a bit long. And since this paper is so darn thin and this ink is so dark, you are definitely going to get some echo. And since, again, I do consider myself pretty sensitive to it, that would it would be noticeable to me. It would be a little bit distracting. That's personal. I mean, echo is always a personal taste thing. You don't get a whole lot of shading just because the way this ink tends to pool because it takes long to dry. But it is very pleasant. This, I think, but it's still noticeably brown. A very dark brown, but noticeably brown. I don't know if it would be passable as just a black ink, but and then because it's Tomoe River, it doesn't bleed, doesn't feather, doesn't spread. Tomoe River, don't play that. Now, it did dye the page a little bit, but because this paper loves to let ink slide away when you add more water, it really let it slide away. So when I sopped up the water, didn't dye the page too much. And that water test, very clear, very there, didn't feather, didn't explode, absolutely readable. Now for the next 3 tests, to be fair, I only used that Japanese fine except to write the name. And here is the world's worst 20-pound copier paper. And to prove it, see how this is almost the same size as that medium? Look at it compared to the Japanese fine on non-absorbent paper. Line width definitely got larger. See that? See shading? See that feathering? And I meant the word shading, because there is no shading on here. The shading is gone. And here, it's almost like a red-brown. Almost, it got a little bit lighter. It took 2 seconds to dry, which makes sense, because this is still a very saturated ink. So we got spread. We definitely got feathering. And we kind of got a little bit of near bleed. I mean, but what's interesting, you see that medium? It's almost as much as it is anywhere else with that Japanese fine. So, for some reason, right here, wanted to come through more. Not so much anywhere else, but yeah, and because it's still hazy, you can tell it didn't come all the way through. It never rendered onto the next page. So, not so bad there. But yeah, echo, yeah, I'd say it's show through that turns into echo. However, look at this water test. Now, it is absorbent paper. It tends to draw the ink in, not want to let it all wash out because it's so absorbent. Look at that. Look at how clear that is. It didn't feather. It didn't, at least not more than it did up there. Absolutely readable. You don't even get that much, like, weird color explode. Actually, that looks like it's on fire. That's kind of cool. Anyways, moving on. Mead Notebook Paper. Very thin, very inexpensive, very common for American school children. It's very cheap. And lately, the last 3 weeks, it's been feathering. Doesn't usually do that nearly as much as it has been lately. And so I'd say it's maybe feathering as much as the 20-pound. But it's definitely not spreading as much as the 20-pound. I'd say it's spread half as much. But yeah, you don't really get shading, but you still noticeably get that like deep, rich red-brown. 2.5 seconds to dry, which makes sense even though this is absorbent paper because it is still very saturated. And that was mostly me, trying to see if I could get some shading. So that was me. But naturally, there is no bleed. There is some echo, because it is a very dark ink, and this is very cheap, thin paper. But honestly, I don't know, maybe I would write on both sides of this. Like for a lab notebook, yeah. But the water test is really what does it for me. This paper tends to freak out when you add water. Not here. Look at how clear that is at the center. There's not any more feathering than you see up above. And once again, it looks like it's on fire. Look at that orange. That's cool. I like that effect. That's kind of fun. Anyways, lastly is Moleskine paper, which is the bane of my existence. I hate it. It's terrible. I can't believe I ever paid this much for it. I've got like 16 notebooks sitting in a drawer and I can't get rid of them because nobody wants them and I wouldn't give them to someone I actually liked. God, I hate Moleskine. Anyways, obviously very absorbent paper, because look at how like gross and woolly it is. You do kind of get shading-ish, but I mean, it's just in the mushy bits. 4.5 seconds to dry, which I can't explain, because obviously it's absorbent. What the heck? You get crazy feathering. Look at that feathering. So it's not even pretty to put up with the feathering. And then I'm angry. Anyways, and then you get this stuff. What's funny is you see the medium? It only comes through about as much as it does anywhere else. But it's like this intense echo. In fact, the camera's not showing it all that well. But you can sort of see like a... I don't know. It's... bleh. Man, I hate this paper. Now, what's really interesting is it didn't dye the page like it did every other time. But what's really weird is that stuff at the center. It's not like we see that separation of like orange and brown like we saw in the other absorbent papers. We just get a ton more feathering. So it's like it feathered once when it was first written, and it feathered all over again when we added water. I hate this paper. I hate Moleskine. Stupid Moleskine. Yeah, so there you go. There's Sailor, Jentle Doyou, Midsummer. Highly saturated, which is going to draw out the dry times. However, you get this really interesting light brown, dark gold, hazy sheen. It's a very pleasant color, but because it is very saturated, you're gonna need to maybe do an extra flush of water to get it out of your pens. It's not gonna damage your pens. It's just, you know, like when you do like a little bit of a, like, you know, a little bit of squeezing water through it, just gonna have to do that a little bit more. And for this color, this whole thing it's got going on here, I would definitely do it. Yeah, I say give it a try. If you have this ink, if you have a bottle of it, if you've encountered any problems with it, please leave a message down below just to inform those who might be looking into it. I'm sure we'd all appreciate it. But for your consideration from the Triple N Network, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.